And I have to bring this up because I'm watching YouTube videos in my spare time when I'm not studying the Torah, right, or looking for a job. But I was watching these YouTube videos on the upcoming movie Thor, Love and Thunder. And so some of you know about this, right? Marvel movie. Thor is a comic book character. And Thor is considered a god. And in this movie, it's just taken for granted that there are all these god-like characters. And this is true of the MCU concept anyway, right? If you've seen any of the other movies that Marvel puts out, right? The Eternals and the Avengers and things like that. I mean, who hasn't seen the Avengers on planet Earth, right? In the 21st century. So we have this idea of gods, but in the Marvel universe, anyone can be a god if you have a certain amount of powers, right? And there's kind of lesser gods and greater gods and powerful gods and OG gods, and right, the Eternals are a very high level of god, but then you've got these really old gods, right? He who shall not be named is a god or whatever, and but then in Thor: Love and Thunder, there's Zeus who shows up, and then you've got Gore the God Butcher, who's a kind of a god as well. And then, so what's my point? My point is this. In the modern version of the word God or deity, there are numerous definitions. Depending on how much power you have and whatever abilities you possess, you can be a god. But that's the modern pop culture version of the word deity or God. But in the first century, that's not the way it worked. It was a very limited definition. It was more limited in its use. The word deity or the word God there was used to describe a quality that was very signature to what the Hebrews understood as of God, the one who created everything, right? So if you said, who's the creator? We'd say God. Well, that's a signature action. Why did I bring all that up? Because when we say the Holy Spirit is everywhere, we say that the Holy Spirit is omnipresent. He's everywhere at the same time. This is a signature quality that only God can possess, right? Other beings or deities, right, were not known to possess this quality of being everywhere. They were localized, right? The gods of Olympus were localized. They were always in one place, right? The gods of the ancient pagan systems of the day, the ancient Greek gods, the ancient Roman gods, the ancient Egyptian gods, and ancient Canaanite gods and stuff. They're all fairly localized. So if you move to a different location, you encountered a different god. But in the case of the Hebrews, they understood that God is not local. He's everywhere at the same time. And yet, he chose to demonstrate himself in a localized fashion by concentrating his glory into the address of the tabernacle or the temple or something like that. But for the most part, that didn't diminish the fact that he was still enthroned in heaven. They didn't think that, God moved from point A to point B because he can't be everywhere at the same time. But the Holy Spirit is like God. He has that quality. So that's why we have to look at that. Similar along that same vein, which is why I took the time to explain it, is that he's also all-knowing, right? He doesn't have any limits in his knowledge. And we're going to look at, I didn't look at the passages. The fact that he's everywhere shows up in the book of Psalms, chapter 139. The fact that he's all-knowing shows up in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. And then it's the Holy Spirit who sanctifies us, according to 1 Peter. It's the Holy Spirit who's the life giver, according to 2 Corinthians. It is the Holy Spirit that we have fellowship with, also in 2 Corinthians and in the book of Philippians. The Holy Spirit is eternal, according to the book of Romans 11 again, where we just looked at he who raised Jesus from the dead. And then the book of Hebrews, the Holy Spirit is eternal. These, again, are qualities and signatures that otherwise belong to God, the being known as God, or God the Father, if you want to give him that label in this personhood. But otherwise, when the Holy Spirit comes along and is described using these same qualities, it lets us know that the Holy Spirit is, in fact, very God. He's not a less than God, lesser being than God, or a lesser quality. And then we're going to begin to look at actions and attributes that define personhood, right? All sorts of living beings and creatures exist on the earth today, right? Plants are living, animals live, humans live, right? But there are different attributes that allow us to bring in this adjective known as person, right? My dog isn't I don't have a dog, but if I had one, dogs aren't persons, right? Dogs are animals. What qualifies it or disqualifies them from being a person, right? Plants are a living thing, but they're not persons, and they're not animals either, right? So we have different classifications. Well, the Holy Spirit is not a thing. His classification is person. How do we know this? Because this next few ones that we're going to be looking at, he has a will, right? Well, wait a minute. Dogs have wills too. Okay, dogs are animals. Are we saying the Holy Spirit's an animal? I hope you're not saying he's an animal. But the description that we're going to begin to make is that electricity doesn't have a will, right? Plants, last time I checked, they might have a will, but how would we know? Have they expressed it, right? But definitely electricity, the force known as electricity that's driving this computer right now that I'm looking at, it doesn't have a will, not of its own. And if it does have a will of its own, can it express its will independent of what man manipulates? So the Holy Spirit, he has a will, and that's a personhood quality that we're going to read about in 1 Corinthians. The Holy Spirit, likewise, like people, like I'm doing right now, right? Ariel's a person, last time I checked. Human beings can speak. Why? Because we're persons. The Holy Spirit can speak as well. He's not an impersonal force like the Jehovah's Witnesses want us to believe, or like some other Unitarian Christian groups want us to believe. The Holy Spirit can speak. We're going to see this in the book of Acts. And then the Holy Spirit can love. Again, these are personhood qualities. In the book of Romans, we're going to look at the love of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit searches the heart. How can he do that? Unless he's a person, right? He's not an impersonal force or an object or a gift from God that's merely an object that's to be passed from people to people. All right? Passed from father to his children. In the book of 1 Corinthians, we'll read about how he searches the heart. And then lastly in this list, which is obviously not exhaustive, the Holy Spirit gives joy, and we're going to read about that in the book of Romans. Again, these are personhood qualities that are only possible if the Holy Spirit is in fact a person, and we're going to read that. And this, I've said this over and over again, this is, I think, the weakness of the Unitarian position.